The webinar today builds on a debate that we published late last year on this very topic of surveillance capitalism. And we're absolutely delighted as a journal to be creating this platform for this important and timely discussion. As a theory journal, I hope you appreciate that we see it as our responsibility and even as our mandate to support and champion important intellectual voices and to support the kind of big theory that really speaks to the issues of our time. And we feel that surveillance capitalism is one such issue where the three speakers will shed their light on that topic and in a way that we hope will change minds and influence society for the better. It's a topic where the three speakers of today have really developed a lot of groundbreaking theorizing, and we're very happy to have them with us today. Surveillance capitalism, as you know, the use of online human data for behavioral modification and profit is increasingly pervasive across societies around the globe. And it's having massive negative, whatever good it's doing, it's also having massive negative societal consequences. So think of the teen mental health epidemic, elections being manipulated, the amplification of hate speech and misogyny online, and the list goes on and on and on. And from a business perspective, these things have so far, if we would have to put a label on it, been seen as externalities to the business model. Shoshana Zuboff, the first speaker of today, talks of a death match in her paper in OT between surveillance capitalism and democracy to really describe the predicament that we're currently in as societies, as citizens in our societies. And she also describes how we as scholars, citizens and activists need to fight back and reclaim our societies and our rights in particular as individual citizens. Mikkel, the second speaker, esteemed speaker of today, highlights the performative nature of the data architectures underlying surveillance capitalism and how these architectures essentially strip away our very essence of being social human beings and reduce us to effectively digital traces online. And he worries that if that continues, this has huge implications also for us as academics, as scholars, because what we will be studying in a post-social social science will be a very different type of social animal than we would be studying before. And Mikkel Flyverbom, our third speaker, esteemed speaker of today, he talks about, he coins a very insightful metaphor to capture the pervasiveness of surveillance capitalism across the globe, and how there's hardly any place online where we're not being visible or being seen by surveillance capitalists. And he really calls for regulation to curb what private data the surveillance capitalists can see and what they can make use of. A few weeks ago, the Guardian journalist John Norton referred to our current relationship to technology, and he was also talking about surveillance capitalism as a Faustian bargain. So even if we feel that we might get some positives from it, so we get some services that delight us, it helps us solve some problems, at the end of the day, the devil will get everything else. Maybe a bit stark, but I hope you get the picture, including our very soul and our very nature of who we are as human beings. So the stakes could not be higher. And as said, we're very happy to support this debate today and also to support the generative ideas, the activism and the actions that it no doubt will lead to. I'm very happy with the three speakers and that we can host this webinar today for you. Look forward to the discussion, and I now hand over to my colleague Samar Faraz, who's the technology editor on the team. Over to you, Samar.
Thank you, Joop. I am very glad to welcome you also, and I would like to say that our purpose today is to deepen and clarify consequential ideas and to collectively engage toward converging on a conceptual and theoretical vocabulary that can be used generatively by others beyond the pioneers around this table. Our three speakers need no further introduction, but I would like to say that a couple words about each in terms of trajectory. Shoshana Zuboff has long been a thought leader for those interested in understanding technological developments, impact work, organization, and society. Many of you are familiar with her previous book, In the Age of the Smart Machine, where she reported on a 10-year exploration of how work was being transformed like what we called back then computerization, and more specifically how people experience these changes and these new circumstances of production. Today, her 2019 book on surveillance capitalism has had an even larger impact and has already garnered over 9,000 scholarly citations. Its importance for me is giving voice and providing a conceptual vocabulary that to what many academics and non-academics experience as a wrong turn for the digital society we now live in. The podcaster Russell Brand even introduced Shoshana last year as an epoch maker and labeled her book as the Das Kapital of the 21st century. Our second guest, Mikkel Power, has done foundational work on the Audit Society and looked at societal and organizational dispositions related to quantification and the focus on performance results in most aspects of organizational life. He has widely published on the micro foundations of the Audit Society, and he joins Shoshana through his work on traceability and the misuse of what both of them call as digital exhaust. Mikkel Flyverbom has been very focused on understanding the dynamics of digital media, and in his recent book, The Digital Prism, has focused on the change transparency inherent in the current regime of knowledge production and the struggle surrounding managing visibilities in what he refers to as datafied world. He more than most has emphasized the importance of anticipatory governance structures to accompany and control the emerging regime of knowledge production. So welcome again, Shoshana, Mikkel, and Mikkel. So this session is meant to be a conversation between the three of you, and we hope to generatively build on each other. Importantly, we will involve the audience, but we'll first start with a statement by each of you, and I'll ask the first question after that, and then we will open it up to the audience. For the audience, it's probably best to raise your hand or to put in a question in the chat, and Ibrat and us will try to manage that part. So to you, Shoshana.
Thank you so much, Samer. I just need to start off with a moment of thanks to everybody. First of all, thanks to you, the extraordinary and very cool editor-in-chief of Organization Theory. Thank you for undertaking this project. Thank you for your vision, your good counsel, your steadfastness, and your willingness to shepherd every detail so that we could finally arrive at this moment. And thanks to Sophia and Marcus, Samer, and the rest of the amazing team at Organization Theory and of course at SAGE as well. I want to thank my brilliant colleagues, Mike Power and Mikkel Flyverbom, for their powerful contributions to the theory of surveillance capitalism. Their papers reveal yawning spaces of unprecedented life worlds, just crying out for theorization and granular explication. They remind us of scholarship as adventure, discovery, leaps into the unknown, and the courage to reveal and name for the sake of the world. Thank you for all who are joining us today. And for the younger folks among you, students, new faculty and researchers, I have 3 words for all of you. I am sorry. Surveillance capitalism is the novel mutation of information capitalism born in the USA that rose to global dominance in our century on the strength of an extraordinary, brazen, and audacious idea that predictions of human behavior could be sold like tons of wheat or barrels of oil, that human futures could be traded just like any other commodity futures. Behavioral prediction on this scale demanded the secret massive scale extraction of human signals for datafication, manufacture, and sales. This economy of traces that Mike explores so beautifully in his paper was quickly recognized as a fast track to data monetization and spread like an invasive species without predators, helping a lot of startups climb out of the crisis of the dot-com bust back at the beginning of the century. From Google to Facebook to the tech sector, and now reorganizing every sector, from healthcare to automobiles and everything in between. This happened on my watch. It happened on my generation's watch. There should have been natural predators. There should have been guardians in the watchtowers. Instead, there was a political class in the United States captured by a radical market privileging economic ideology, and then fortified by a so-called war on terror and its obsession with total information awareness. Surveillance capitalism is what happened when democracy in the United States stood down. But eventually, and especially after 9/11, most democracies around the world followed the United States' lead. These conditions combined to nurture the startups that have become empires, to clear their path of any lawful constraints that could have and that should have identified the new architectures of secret extraction as theft. Instead, the emerging information and communication spaces of a new information civilization were abdicated to the companies, free to follow their economic imperatives wherever they might lead. I've spent the last 2 years on this paper for 3 specific reasons that I'll share with you. First of all, a sense of urgency. At the outset of the digital century, the democracies left a void that was filled by surveillance capitalism. We forfeited the critical first decades of the digital century, depriving an increasingly connected global community of a clear path to a democratic and digital future, and leaving all of us naked in the face of new forms of digitally mediated economic violence. It's time to reclaim the void. And it's the democracies that are best positioned to take the lead. In my view, this 3rd decade of our century is essential for turning this around. But we cannot wait for this to happen from the top down. We need citizen mobilization, which also means public education. That puts us, scholars, researchers, journalists, all of us have a critical role to play on the front line in producing the work that reveals the actual dimension and consequence of the world that surveillance capitalism is making for us. Second, a sense of frustration and even anxiety. How can we be successful if we are balkanized, fragmented, siloed, and specialized? Some of us study the loss of privacy, others disinformation and the negation of information integrity, others information oligopoly or the breakdown of the public sphere, or the operations and algorithms that secretly shape individual and collective behavior, or the rise of de facto governance powers in corporations that were never elected to govern. And of course, there's so much more. We need this deep knowledge, but we also need a comprehensive shared understanding of the economic elephant that produces each successive form of digitally mediated violence. We need to reckon with upstream causes versus downstream effects, to consider the ways in which each of these fragmented subjects is linked, part of a path-dependent sequence of hierarchical capabilities that define the growth of surveillance capitalism as a global institutional order and the intensification of its economic, but also social and governance powers. Importantly, this unified field perspective that I've endeavored to convey illustrates the ways in which the entire institutional order is balanced on the illegitimate foundations of secret massive scale extraction of the human. Operations that, as I've suggested, could have been, should have been, but never were named and contested as theft. Third, I suffer from a sense of stagnation, another source of anxiety. For 2 decades, the conversation has centered on regulation. Yes or no? If yes, what and how much? For 2 decades, surveillance capitalism has ascended to dominance, while we have seen a kind of unraveling of core capabilities of our democratic systems. Regulation sets conditions for a thing. It's a bargain, a compromise that does not fundamentally contest the existence of that thing. I wanted to consider the ways in which the commodification of the human and its operationalization in secret massive scale extraction is categorically catastrophic for democracy at every level of the social system, from the ontological and existential to the political and systemic. Historically, one sees that the necessary response to that which is categorically catastrophic for democracy is not compromise, but abolition. My paper explores the implications of redefining secret massive scale extraction as theft and the case for its abolition. Indeed, abolition may be the single most effective approach to reclaiming the void and clearing the way for productive, pro-social information economics that advance the values and principles of democratic governance, the production of data tied to individual decision rights, the use of data tied to public good. Abolition would effectively halt our downward spiral toward an already visible dystopic future that unites the vast majority of the world's people in dread. Thank you for listening. I look forward to our discussions and hearing your questions, and of course, hearing from my brilliant colleagues, which I'm excited about. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shoshana. To be continued. Mike, to you for a few comments.
Yeah, thanks very much, Sana, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much, Shoshana, and thank you, Yup, for taking me on this journey and engaging me with a community I don't ordinarily enact with. I'm a scholar of accounting mainly, but the opportunity to engage with Shoshana's work and think through its implications for accounting, and indeed, as I'll say shortly, the implications of accounting for some of the questions that she's raising was too good to turn down. I'm going to talk around the paper in the sense that one of my preoccupations was to figure out whether the terms of reference of the Audit Society thesis were still valid in the face of surveillance capitalism. Is surveillance capitalism an expansion of some of those themes of excessive control and performance auditing, or is something quite new going on? And in a sense, what kind of accounting model of order is being reproduced or indeed displaced? And in a way, the paper is an extended reflection on the challenges of surveillance capitalism to accounting. And one of the places I got to was the way in which accounting is being reshaped in the direction of a more tracking-led mode of accounting. Historically, one might argue that accounting is itself something that has led the correction of traces, that has led tracking, that has been oriented to accountability and to governance as part of what Shoshana calls the juridical contractual order of holding power to account. This is the kind of original idealistic conception of accounting. And the funny thing is that for all its pathologies and its deep association with 3 decades of neoliberalism, accounting still embodies some of that democratic hope, albeit in a distorted way. And therefore, accounting under the Audit Society and accounting and audit look very different from the world that Shoshana is describing. That world, the logic of surveillance capital, as she's indicated to us, is profoundly non-democratic. There is no sort of democratic residual, if you like, and is formative of new socialities, which we might well talk about. But as far as accounting is concerned, this tracking-led, this tracing-led mode of accounting, which can be epitomized by the rise of the dashboards and our obsession with feedback as a mode of control, and the security discourses that operate around that. This is a kind of new accounting order, which is the spokesperson for surveillance capitalism. This is surveillance accounting. And it didn't just start suddenly. I think concerns within the accounting academy with being more receptive to non-financial indicators initially start within organizations, but then begin to grapple with aspects of society outside organizations, like customers. And so it is almost a natural extent of that tracking ambition, which is many decades old, that surveillance capitalism provides it with the computational power to have that reach. So I want to present to you an image of a schizophrenic accounting. To those of you who are thinking about accounting for the very first time, I think about it a lot, naturally. A schizophrenic view of accounting as being this combination of accountability-oriented tracking and tracing, but also of a control, an ambitious control orientation of tracking and tracing. And this combination has lived uneasily as a kind of portfolio of sensibilities within practice. But under surveillance capitalism, under the conditions that Shoshana has described, the balance has shifted very, very strongly in one direction. And the consequences of that are what I would call a flattening out of oversight, of mechanisms of oversight and the role of accounting in that, a flattening of governance, what Shoshana calls the carving out of governance, and the rise of a new intellectual order, which bursts into the academy as well, where we accounting academics were just under laborers to surveillance capitalism, operating on the nuances of the very same data that surveillance capitalism is producing. So I think there's a lot at stake for accounting in surveillance capitalism. And I want to leave you with the thought that there's also a lot at stake for surveillance capitalism and some of the more interventionist themes, even abolition, that Shoshana was talking about. Normatively, we need to recover accounting. And this matters a great deal for what is widely known as the ESG agenda. That ESG agenda could eventually end up being a hostage to this tracking-led accounting system, producing more and more dashboards and more surveillance, if you like, but very little action, as it were. So we need to restore some of the oversight capacity that is part of the originating vision of accounting. So I think I'll leave my statement at that point. I haven't said very much about some of the themes in the paper, not least platformization and cyborgization. They are a bit of a mouthful, but they were part of my journey in perhaps getting to this clearer picture of how we might actually look back nostalgically on the Audit Society for all its pathologies. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. We will engage further with these thoughts. And now to you, Mikkel.
Thank you so much, both for the opportunity to have this conversation, but certainly also for the two wonderful papers by Shoshana and Mike. I have really enjoyed reading them, and I will continue to do so. So obviously, I'm really thrilled about the opportunity to be part of this exchange where we talk about surveillance capitalism, digital architectures, and data traces and visibilities in a kind of a conversation that I think is really collective and creative and so on. So I think collectively we call for this deeper engagement with technological architectures and digital exposure and new data-driven forms of social ordering in the field of organization theory. So I'll speak a little bit about some of the underlying ideas and then offer a few suggestions for where we could explore this more in the field, and also, some of the political solutions I think we need along the lines of what Shoshana started out by saying. So I've been interested in these processes of digital mediation and reorganization, and the way humans and organizations kind of deal with these situations. So digital technologies and datafication give us new ways of seeing and knowing and governing social affairs. And I think there's so much work in organization theory that needs to capture these digital transformations and their consequences. So in my paper, which I called Overlit Digital Architectures of Visibility, I explore these issues. And I thought I would start out by just explaining the title of this paper. So I call it Overlit in the first part, because this was my attempt to sort of describe a human condition where everything in a sort of digital and datafied world can be turned into digital traces. So everything can be exposed, everything can be turned into data and sorted out algorithmically in these new ways. So I think of this as a kind of shift in default from a situation in the past where information was scarce and difficult to get to, and where we had to search and work hard to sort of dig out information. In many ways, this is what we call the Enlightenment period, where things were dark and things were difficult to get to and so on. So when I talk about a kind of shift in default, I mean, and this is why I called it overlit, I think we live in a new age that we can think of a little cheekily as a kind of overlightenment period, a moment where everything gets exposed, everything gets turned into data and can be seen and so on and so forth. So that means instead of having to search for information and store information, the kind of tasks we need and the competences we need are really about avoiding information sometimes, avoiding knowledge that we don't want. It's the skills we need about organizing information because it's so abundant, and also sometimes to hide information and to hide ourselves in these kind of overlit spaces. So that's the one starting point for my paper. And the second one is then this key concept that I try and develop in the paper, which is digital architectures of visibility. And by this, I mean a kind of attempt to conceptualize the results of these digital transformations and the shift in default. And then by this, I mean that as our lives are turned into data and travel through what I call this kind of digital prism, where everything gets seen and known and recategorized in a way, we need to think about how to manage our visibilities. So for humans and organizations, this work of sort of engaging with information and organizing information becomes absolutely crucial. So the point is really that digital transformations create these kind of new forms of observation, new forms of knowledge production, and they also, I think, bring about a new kind of social order that we have yet to understand and conceptualize and so on. So what I do in the paper is to do two different moves. One is to sort of extend what Shoshana has done in her book and other work on surveillance capitalism, to also focus a little more on the kind of material shape of the technologies that facilitate this condition. So I sort of try to articulate the overall shape of these digital spaces. So I think digital architectures at the moment consist of an interesting mix of technologies, of data and algorithms that come to play a central role as a kind of machinery that we have yet to understand, and along the lines of Shoshana's work, obviously a kind of machinery that is driven by a particular set of political and commercial forces that we have to sort of understand as part of these technological transformations. So I think the scope where we look at digital spaces by also engaging with the kind of political and commercial forces that propel them is an important starting point. And the second move I make in the paper is then to say, what happens inside these digital architectures? What are the kind of social dynamics that become central in these spaces as they become a kind of backbone in organizations and society? And here I'm interested in these questions about visibility and the management of visibilities, how people in various types of social dynamics seek to sort of control their traces, engage with traces, become datafied in ways that make some parts of their lives very visible and others invisible, and the kind of work that needs to be done to control and govern your presence in these kind of in these spaces. So the point of the second move is to say, as a result of this shift in default, the management of visibilities becomes a key concern for individuals and organizations that are somehow overlit by this situation. So I think this raises a number of questions for organization theory that we need to focus on both empirically and conceptually, and I think we'll engage with those in the conversation a little later. But I think in many ways, this kind of shift in default, or this human condition, really sort of reinvigorates most discussions in organization theory. And this is why, in a sense, we need so much work that draws from Shoshana's work, this broad mapping of the phenomena that she's offered us, and paves the way for much more granular empirical and conceptual accounts of the things that make up this massive problem that she has identified. So I think of my own work as a very small, humble little attempt to offer some kind of addition to this way of thinking that we, based on the big map, we need much more granular conceptual and empirical work that explores questions about knowledge production, about visibility, transparency, and so on and so forth. So again, I think this also translates into a kind of pressing demand for regulatory and other kinds of political initiatives like abolition that Shoshana talked about. So I think we need to keep in mind that there are institutional and democratic and collective issues that we need to engage with, both as scholars, but also as parents and individuals and people engaged in policy work and so on. And these are really about normalizing the tech industry like we've done with other industries. We don't accept the kind of behaviors we see in the tech industry in pharmaceutical companies or in chemical producers and so on and so forth. I think we also need to consider whether there are parts of this business model that should simply be no longer exist, so to speak. So there are forms of data harvesting and sort of addiction-producing design and behavioral modification that Shoshana talks about that maybe should not exist in the future. And then I think these fundamental questions about, and this is also, I think, in a sense, what my paper tries to pave the way for, that we can think of other kinds of digital infrastructures that would support our democracies and support our welfare, so we can have digital transformations and digital solutions on other terms than the present ones. So in my work for the Danish Data Ethics Council and an expert group on tech giants, I'm engaged in attempts to sort of offer ways of thinking differently about digital infrastructures as a kind of responsibility for our democratic institutions and not something we can leave in the hands of commercial forces that are far from our values, far from our sort of ethics, and far from the kind of responsibilities we have as societies. I'll stop here, but thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mikkel, for these thoughtful comments, and we'll have a chance to deepen it a bit, because actually I want to ask a question that relates to what you hinted at in terms of what does it or organizational theory. So among scholars interested in organization theory, there's a growing awareness and heightened interest. And I would say triggered or helped a great deal by the folks around this table in figuring out what digitization of everything means for our knowledge of organizing. At its most basic, our assumption of what an organization is appear to be dated and behind the times. For example, generative AI, also known as large language models, are improving at such a geometric rate that knowledge work in organization obviously will have to transform in fundamental and yet unprecedented ways. The boundaries of organizations are also being renegotiated, as some of you mentioned, with the GAFAM digital platforms using their digital data dominance to break into previously closed economic segments or bringing about the emergence of new ones. So the question to each one of you is, how should organizational scholars approach the new organizing possibilities that are emerging with this maturing surveillance capitalism regime? Shoshana, if you want to start, we will follow the same order.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Samar. I'd be happy to. Well, there's so many things to say about this, and I won't say them all, but I'll share a couple of highlights that are on my mind. I mean, when Mikkel first spoke to me about doing this project, this special section in organization theory, I was very excited about it. And one of the reasons that I was so excited about it is because organizations, as a class of social constructions, organizations are the experimental laboratory for what will be imposed as social norms in another 5, 7 years, whatever that time frame might be. This is a logic that I'm very familiar with. Samar, you mentioned earlier in the age of the smart machine. You did mention it was a 10-year project. I think you did. Anyway, it was a 10-year project because I wanted to understand the impact of what we used to call computerization, on society more generally. But in 1978, when I began that work, if you wanted to see a computer, you had to go into a work organization. That's where they lived. And so I began my focus with the computerization of work, ultimately labor and management, and everything that lives inside of that, socially and psychologically and so forth. And what I came to understand was that what was going on in these organizations that I studied was a preview of what was going to be exported to society at large. And indeed, when I wrote the book, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, I was so conscious of the ways in which I was at a certain level rewriting Smart Machine. But I was rewriting it now, not to talk about work, but to talk about the general conditions of existence that have been made for us. And I'll mention that it was Durkheim who, at least in my knowledge, was one of the first to point out this trajectory, because he was interested in the division of labor in society. But of course, he exported that concept from the new factories where the division of labor had become a feature of production. And it was what interested him was the migration of the division of labor from that closed zone to society at large and what that would mean. So here we are. So what does this say about the research that we do and the kind of scholarship that we do? I think it means that we have a special burden. We have a special responsibility we are the town criers. We are the guardians in the watchtowers. We are the ones who have a front row seat on exactly the kinds of transformations that will be washing past the virtual boundaries of today's organizations into our lives. And we got a taste of that during the pandemic, didn't we? With all of us working from home, and suddenly organization and home blending and blurring. And no wonder so many of us don't want to go back into that more closed system, because it has become an onerous and dangerous place of surveillance and computational governance of labor and of work processes. So what am I saying here? I'm saying in organizations, we've got captive populations, and everything that we fear for dystopia tomorrow is being experimented with there today. This means that not only do we have a burden and a responsibility, but that implies the discipline of critical thinking that we aren't necessarily taught when we go through graduate school to become organizational scholars. That means we have to be looking through the lens of power and dialectics and history and interests. We have to fight the slow petrification of the human cognition as we are habituated to conditions that never should have been allowed to exist in the first place. We have to fight the myth of inevitability, and we have to do it vocally and explicitly. All of this means that implicitly, we have an allegiance to society, because society is ultimately the target of the operations that we're seeing in workplaces today. I could say so much more about this. I shall not, but maybe we'll come back to it in another question. But I just want to finish this with a reminder to you about who we are, what we are, because we're trained professionals, we're scholars, we're researchers, but at the end of the day, it's society, it's our societies that give us the privilege to do this kind of extraordinary work, where we get to think and read and enjoy the thrill of discovery. For me, it's paradise. And I feel such an obligation to the world, to my society, to pay back, and to pay back with the work of revelation, the work of the Watchtower. What I'm saying is that we don't stop being moral human beings. We don't turn off our moral compasses when we put on our scholarly and our research hats. And I'm going to share with you a brief comment from Hannah Arendt that I have carried in my satchel just about all of my adult life. So she was at a conference of scholars on totalitarianism, and she was on a panel, and she spoke. And then one of her colleagues, a male colleague, they were probably all male colleagues if we think about it, criticized her for being too passionate about totalitarianism. And her remarks, I read them when I was young, I keep them with me in my brain all the time. She said, and I think this is the outline of our responsibility as moral humans, quote, "The natural human reaction to the conditions of totalitarianism is one of anger and indignation, because these conditions are against the dignity of man." Sick. If I describe these conditions without permitting my indignation to interfere, then I have lifted this particular phenomenon out of its context in human society and have thereby robbed it of part of its nature, deprived it of one of its most important inherent qualities. We turn off our moral judgment, we turn off our critical thinking, we turn off our innate reactions as human beings, as Mikkel said, as parents, as loved ones, as citizens. Then we betray the phenomenon itself, and we betray the society that has given us this opportunity. So, bravo for us, so much opportunity to contribute and also to have that thrill of discovery that so few professions can offer. Yes, let's do that.
Thank you, very thoughtful. Mike, do you want to relate to that?
Yeah, I'll say a couple of things. Thanks so much, Shoshana. I mean, you lift us up with your words. Thank you. I'm just going to say two things. I mean, as a drier continuation of your comments, theory becomes very important in a post-theoretical world, or a world where theory is being squeezed, as it were. So that would be, one sort of statement. And I think we, in relation to Mikkel's comments, I think we need to open the black box of the digital much more. We use it as a shorthand very often. We all do. It's convenient, but it contains a multiplicity of different things. And it also has, very importantly, a long history. And when one looks at that history, one can see binary logics stretching back and forms of reductionism. So one can see not just through the emergence of electronics and computing, but actually the emergence of the logic of the digital in the analog world to a large degree. So I think that kind of historical sensibility will prevent us, all of us, young and old, from being ensnared in this phenomenon and able to construct what is, after all, important for us, even as very impassioned thought leaders, if you like, in order to maintain some distance as well from the phenomenon itself. And to younger scholars, that sort of maintaining of both distance and proximity is how you will forge your identities as scholars and people. And it's not always easy, but nevertheless, one can focus on particular things. So I think we shouldn't be lazy about the digital. And then the second point I will make is that I read a very interesting paper, I think it was Org Theory, talking about organizationality. And organizationality, whatever we mean by that, is what's at stake here. I think we kind of get the story that platforms are kind of changing the topology of traditional forms of organization. But hey, eBay still has to file accounts and, still has kind of employees who have to be paid and all those kinds of things. So although these topologies are changing, there are also legal entities. And I think the exploration of this, what's at stake for organizationality of these hybrid forms of practice, and indeed, I would say accounting. We haven't mentioned much about law at the moment, but the world is still populated by legal entities, and they don't always behave well, but they do contain the residual hope of accountability wrapped around them. So if I was going for one of these big corporations, I probably would try and open the door of the legal entities and see what's going on in them as a point of access to many of the issues that the Shoshana is talking about. In accounting, we know the importance of the entity concept for what it is you're accounting for, and that this doesn't always correspond to the real boundaries of organizations. And so there's a lot at stake to study here in terms of shifting boundary conditions and maybe tempering some of our kind of conceptions that platforms are an entirely new organizational form. They have some very, very traditional bits embedded in them. Otherwise, and this is the the juridical contract. Otherwise, they wouldn't work if those conditions weren't there. And so we need to bring some of that to the surface as a critical resource. And just finally, when Shoshana mentioned Hannah Arendt, I did my PhD on the Frankfurt School, so reading your book, Shoshana, it felt like a kind of digital version of critical theory, and I mean that in the best possible sense, a kind of an updating of their vocabulary for the predicament that we find ourselves in.
Thank you, Mike.
Mikkel, to you.
Thank you so much. Like Shoshana and Mike, I think this is such a wonderful, exciting moment to be a scholar and a researcher. There's so much work to be done in this area. Unlike other fields, I think this is one that's wide open and ready for so much work conceptually and empirically and so on. So I also totally agree with Mike's, or I'm happy to hear Mike agree that we should open up technology and make it a sort of key concern in organization theory and research and so on. But there's just a problem right here. And that is that at the moment, it is incredibly difficult to get access to these places, to these companies, and to these spaces where digital technologies and algorithms and artificial intelligence are put together. So I think there's a very, very sort of a huge stumbling block. So when Mike talks about these as black boxes, I would just add that they're black boxes for a reason. You know, there are companies and investors and others who are deciding to keep these things away from research. So again, like we wouldn't accept chemical companies or pharma companies to develop medicine and products without some kind of oversight or independent research, we now have a situation where it's almost impossible to get access to these companies and these places where the digital architectures and tools and systems and solutions are put together. So Shoshana talks about this in another paper. She talks about a kind of epistemic inequality as a key feature of our present times. And this epistemic inequality is about companies that know more or less everything about us and us having no access to these companies. So that kind of information asymmetry is a huge problem in the way of the kind of research we need. But still, with that in mind, I think there are still really, really important research endeavors to engage in for younger scholars and for the rest of us and so on. And some of these are, one topic that I'm interested in is, as I put it, social life and social phenomena travel through a kind of digital prism. Technologies become a kind of passage that remediates and recategorize different social phenomena. So I think there's just a ton of work to be done in trying to understand how that phenomenon happens. So a colleague of us who has done work in this field for a long time, Harry Zukas, spoke about this many, many years ago. He's in his paper about the tyranny of light. He spoke about this information reductionism, that rich social phenomena are turned into digital information and come out in a different shape afterwards. So I think we need to look at the shape of those phenomena as they are refracted and recategorized and reduced to information in digital systems and artificial intelligence. So this goes for music, it goes for attempts to prevent crime, it goes for rape investigations, it goes for climate change. There is so much to look into. And the thing is, obviously, as these things become digital and datafied, sometimes decisions are made based not on the rape situation itself or the crime itself, but on some proxies or digital doubles that then become the foundation for making these choices. And this is or decisions. And this is also what Mike accounts for in his paper, I think. This kind of moment where digital traces become our way of producing insight, of producing knowledge, and acting on phenomena that are actually much richer and much more complicated than these digital doubles or the proxies we come to rely on. So I think that needs a lot more work. If I can just add one more, I think we need to really, again, focus on data and algorithms as they travel. So look into how different data sets and different models, algorithmic models, make their way from one organizational setting into another one. And I think this also raises the red flag that we may be sort of importing some of the worst problems from tech companies and social media platforms into our public sector, for instance. So if we start to rely on the same ways of using data, of sorting information out through algorithms, we may be copying some of the worst problems in the digital spaces that you can still log off. And obviously you can't log off the public sector. There are companies and organizations that are so central to our everyday lives, like our schools and so on, that we need to be extra careful, I think.
Thank you, Mikkel. I had more questions prepared, but I'm keeping an eye on the chat, and there are much better questions coming through from the collective view. So I think we should shift without further delay to engaging the audience, engaging the community. So would like to ask the people, some people have been putting questions in the chat, and I would like those who have done so to kind of be the first to raise your hand, and we'll try to take it sequentially. The only request is that you keep your comments a bit brief, given the number of people who are on the chat. Thank you. Yerim, would you like to go? Yerim Joe?
Sure. First of all, thank you so much for this awesome webinar. I am so into this area, and my dissertation is around this realm, so I'm so honored to be here. Thank you so much. So briefly, my question, it seems like in the chat, many of us feel confused with how we can change the discourse when its uses, you know, or the digital surveillance, capitalism is so prevalent and legitimated despite so much of its illegitimacy. How do you see it? And would you please give us some advice regarding this issue?
Is there a particular
Whoever wants to go first.
Well, I'll get us started. The sound was a little bit blurry, but what I think you said was, how do we move in these spaces with a critical scholarly eye when what was the point that users are accepting and so there isn't like the palpable pushback that would lend moral force, let's say, to your observations. Is that kind of the gist of your concern?
Yeah, sort of. I'm sorry about the sound. Is it better now?
Yes.
Okay, so actually from the perspective of organization theory, personally, I'm interested in the legitimacy of the phenomenon. But when I'm summing up the comments in the chat, I felt like others are feeling the same confusion. So it seems like there are a lot of illegitimacy around, you know, this phenomenon. But many of us, many of users, many of regulators, many of like total audiences are actually giving a lot of legitimacy toward using it, right? ChatGPT, a lot of, you know, people were talking about, you know, we use ChatGPT, it feels like we are falling behind if we don't use it type of comments. Okay. So I think there's a tension between legitimacy and illegitimacy of it. And how do you see it? And how do you advise us regarding this conflict?
Yes, well, I mean, this is just what I meant, and I'm very glad you've come back to this theme, because it really is the key theme of all institutional life. You know, I've described surveillance capitalism as an institutional order, no longer concentrated online. It moves through the world. It's in every sector. So the hallmark of a successful institution is its ability to convey a sense of inevitability. And that's where the leadenness of habituation, of normalization, where people begin to buy the idea that this is, which is what the companies have forcefully sold, the idea that everything we're experiencing is somehow an inevitable epiphenomenon of the digital, that it somehow is related to technology. No one feels brave enough to get out in front of the technology train, you know, and say stop. And so what happens is a kind of defense mechanism. So we stop feeling our natural reactions, exactly what Arendt was worried about. And instead we get drawn into this process of habituation and numbing and so forth. All right. Let's pick this up and look at it a couple of ways. First of all, the companies, as we know from institutional theory, you know, the companies count on institutionalization of all kinds of different, more and more automatic routines and capabilities that reproduce the way they are, and with that reproduce the sense of inevitability. We know that we're not talking about a technological phenomenon. We know that we're talking about an economic phenomenon that has also become a social phenomenon and a governance phenomenon. So we know that we're talking about power across these three dimensions: economic, yes; wealth, yes; but also increasing social power, increasing governance power. And what they want us to believe is that nothing can be done about it. And so the thing to keep our eye on, well, two things. The first thing to keep our eye on is whenever they do things, whenever they engage in you know, what are called active measures, when they actually have to intervene in their reproductive systems to do something that is not part of the institution. Action is weaker than institutionalization. That's Jefferson, Institutional Theory 101. Action is weaker than institutionalization. When you see people in an institution scrambling around over action, you know that they're scared. Action is a signal of institutional threat. And right now, even these empires with absolute power and not just economic oligopoly, but actually, you know, societal oligarchic kinds of powers, they're running around doing a lot of action. What is content moderation? Content moderation is completely ex machina. There is nothing in their systems that can control content, that can speak to the nature of information integrity, of fact or defactualization, of all the things that we once called truth. Their systems are what I've talked about in this paper as blind by design, indifferent to truth. It's all about the speed and volume of behavioral signals processing. So now, as they see regulators coming at them and they're more and more scared, there's nothing that they can do as an institution to fix these things that society is worried about. And so instead, what they're doing is they're going ex machina and creating all these, what Chibora would have called pasted up, these little pasted up operations of content moderation, which anyone who has studied this with any depth at all realizes cannot possibly make a dent in the tsunamis of information corruption that flow through these systems. It's just impossible. So so I think that is a very optimistic sign for us. They're scared. Also, their lobbying keeps increasing. Their investment in lobbying keeps increasing exponentially. That's action, ex machina. That's also a sign that they are aware of threat, all right? So they're not as powerful and cool and calm as they want us to believe. All right, let's look at one other thing and then I'll stop. If you actually look at the data, I love this one. This is public demand for regulating big tech. So this is a compilation of 26 national surveys. I cite these surveys all the time, so I was very happy to see that Professor Schaffner from Tufts University did this compilation of all these 26. But now we're looking at survey data. And, you know, survey data, you're lucky to get something that's like 52%. Oh, a majority. In these studies, we're seeing 90th percentiles, 80th percentiles, occasionally 70th percentiles, majorities. Most of these are US studies. Majorities, vast majorities of US participants here who are saying, these companies have too much power. Get them out of my life. I prefer privacy to convenience. Where the heck are our lawmakers? Why aren't there any laws to stop these guys? This is what survey after survey after survey is saying. Last month I was in Chile. There was recently a national survey in Chile, and I was interested to find that in that survey, it was the same outcome. 90th and 80th percentiles of the Chilenos who participated in this population sample were saying, we're scared of this. You know, we need law, we need protection. This is not okay the way this thing is going. We're seeing the same data from Europe, and increasingly as we're getting these kinds of data from other parts of the world, it all looks the same. And that's why I said with some confidence in my remarks that all the people of Earth on Earth are at least connected by this one very big thing, which is that we are all scared to death of this dystopia that we can already see consolidating itself around us. So the people do not want it. The companies are afraid of democracy. They're afraid of the people, and they're afraid of the democracy that the people can summon. And what you're seeing when you're in an organization is captive populations. And what you're seeing when you're hearing people or reading people online saying, oh yeah, I got to get my my chat GPT and, you know, get on the wave here. What you're seeing there are people who are not adequately informed, which goes full circle back to our premise. We must be the watchtower. We must be the revelation. We have this responsibility of public education, even within these captive populations. You know, let there be a new century of organizing. And it won't be the same as organizing workers' rights in the 20th century or the 19th. It will be different, but it will be organizing around the rights that we need today in this century to keep us safe and to keep us free.
Thank you so much. And oh, should I move on? I think there are a lot of hands on, so I'll move on, but thank you so much.
Let me get the next person, unless Mike and Mikkel want to add to.
No, we should have some questions.
Okay, thank you.
Frederick, to you.
Sure. Hello from Copenhagen. Just briefly, thank you so much for these presentations. Obviously, all three of you are big inspirations to me also in my daily work as a younger PhD student, and Mikkel being my supervisor. I was just, and I'll ask it quickly, I was just considering the presentations we've heard in relation to sort of the current and emergent regulatory environment around sort of both personal data harvesting, AI usage, and business models, right? So in Europe in particular, we have these like GDPR, the Digital Markets Act and Services Act, and now the proposed AI regulation. Yet I'm thinking that many of the proposals here today sort of suggest the point too that that this is not sufficient, particularly of course the notion of abolition. So I was just wanted to ask the three speakers of a sort of comment in that regard, or sort of how they see the emergent regulatory field, either specifically in Europe or elsewhere, in relation to the problems discussed today. Thanks.
I'll have a go if I may. Just a very, very quick reaction. I know a little bit about GDPR in my role as a company director, and you need a lot of regulation to regulate privacy. You need a lot of traces. And so one of the ironies in this space of trying to withdraw the reach of some of this stuff is that the regulation itself has to be quite intrusive in a different way, perhaps. But now that the genie is out of the bottle, reversing it also leads to some interesting paradoxes. That's not to say that it shouldn't be done, but GDPR is becoming something of a monster in many places in our universities as well. So absolutely correctly motivated as a counter, but I think it doesn't even get close to the, if you like, the abolitionist sensibilities that Shoshana has shared with us. Thanks.
Mikkel.
Could I just add, I think it's an important question, and I think we sort of need to engage with the current status of attempts to regulate and so on and so forth. But I'm also concerned that in many ways, the tools we're developing as policymakers in the European context, for instance, are also somehow being co-opted by these tech companies. So I spoke before about the difficulty of getting access to these companies as researchers. And what I hear from my colleagues when they try to get access to, say, Google and Facebook and so on, is that, oh, we wish we could give you this access, but GDPR doesn't allow us to do that. So these things that we put in place to actually open up and allow for a new digital future are also being used by these companies. And I think one problem is certainly that we see at the moment, at least in a European context, is that a lot of the solutions to the problem that we are offered are really individual. So this idea that we should be the ones controlling our data, that we should be the ones as parents who are able to pull our kids away from the screen and into have a meal with us and so on. If you can't do that as a parent, you're a bad parent. So there's a kind of individualization of these problems happening in so many different contexts. So I think we need to challenge that and ask for much more institutional, much more kind of political forms of intervention in this area. And I think my overall observation about this is really that in many ways we have the regulatory pillars we need. So we have regulation that is either in place or falling into place, but what we need is enforcement. So I think the major, along with sometimes abolition, I think enforcement is probably the most important area right now to make sure that GDPR and other types of regulation are actually being picked up by national and international institutions and used in cases against some of these companies and in courts and so on and so forth. Because I think for every case that gets taken up, we will see that they can't be won by these tech companies.
Thank you, Mikkel. I want to move on to next questions. Mikala, your hand is up. Your hand is up, but I don't see you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. And I'm sorry, my camera is not working at the moment. So, but thank you very much for your extremely thought-provoking presentations. I'm a little uncertain if you have already delved into this, so then you can just skip it. But my question is because I'm working as an educational anthropologist and techno-anthropologist, and I just got really flabbergasted when ChatGPT entered the world, and so many people threw themselves onto ChatGPT in spite of the fact that it actually threw out a lot of bullshit in the world, misinformation, all kinds of hallucinations and stuff. And then what I found out is I meet a lot of people that get really provoked by the fact that I feel that I can be critical towards ChatGPT without actually having, or based on the fact that I've actually refrained from using it myself. So I think there's a strong incentive towards not missing the train, having to engage with using generative AI to not miss out on being a creative person. And now also this having to be engaged in using, for instance, ChatGPT in order to also be able to truly engage in criticisms. And I know that you have been out, Shoshana, also in the Danish national radio, and stating that really we should just not engage in ChatGPT. And some actually techno-anthropologists in Denmark have been criticizing this, that basically you didn't have any kind of engagements with ChatGPT, or maybe large learning models, or maybe machine learning. So I'm really interested in how would you three people engage in those kinds of criticisms? How can we engage in criticizing this without necessarily having to engage with ChatGPT in practice? I don't know if you understood that. Thanks.
I'll have a quick response. Very, very quick. Someone showed me a ChatGPT essay on my own work, and it was a clear B-. It was a very mediocre piece of work. I suspect that may improve over time, but we should be calling that out. That sort of quality of the output where we can. But no, it's a great question. I'm interested to know what Shoshana says.
Well, I had a very long conversation with the radio announcer, interviewer on that show, and I have no idea what actually was aired, because I was told it was rather short, because I think we were on the phone for something like a couple of hours, but or an hour and a half maybe. But you know what I said then, which I would say to you, is that when we're reading the news and hearing all the buzz about this AI application, it's as if it's something wholly new. And my point to her in that interview was that I don't consider this something wholly new. I consider this another sort of subspeciation of the thing that we've been talking about since we began these conversations an hour ago or whatever it is. In other words, the chat AI is based on the availability and the capabilities, the instrumentation and the architecture of secret massive scale extraction of human data, of behavioral signals and other forms of human data. This is what it's built from. It's scraping the internet, it's lifting from here, it's harvesting from there. That is what it's built from. And so the reason that it can go along for some paragraphs and sound very reasonable, and then suddenly break into expletives and sound like some kind of a right-wing screed, is because it is being fed from all of these sources indiscriminately, blind by design, and then is charged with finding the patterns among all of these signals that correspond to the task it's been asked to perform. So it is a special case in the sense that this is now, just as we were talking a moment ago, what's happening in the workplace, migrating to society at large. This is an example of a migration now into a consumer market that talk about being naked, that really has no critical faculties for interacting with this, and also doesn't understand the ways in which this chat comes from us. It stole from us to fill its belly with whatever it's giving back to us. And yet somehow we are induced to believe that this is, or could be, or soon will be, or eventually will be, a superior form of thought. a superior form of construction. If you read the other day, the folks at OpenAI, they're now concerned about the fact that, we used to say back when we had punch cards, garbage in, garbage out. And now the chat is displaying these problems of garbage in, garbage out, because it's being fed indiscriminately on everything. And so now OpenAI is saying we've got to be more careful about the training data. It should only get certain kinds of training data and not the other kinds of training data and so forth. And so, yeah, this will evolve, but it still comes from us. And what fascinates me about this, and I don't know if this came out in the interview at all, is the way we, to me, it's part of this larger syndrome that we're being swept up in, and we all participate in some way, which is the devaluing of the human in favor of these other machine forms. And it's kind of I read it. I'm also a social psychologist. This is the world that I've been trained in as well. And I read it as a kind of contagion of self-hate toward the human, that an AI or the machine learning, the machine process will somehow, of course, replace the human, of course, be better than the human, when in fact that is a form of mass self-evisceration, and it's not being looked at critically. We don't have the tools to look at it critically because all the messages are coming the other way. So that's what I'm happy to say right now about chat, and I'd love to hear what others think.
Thank you. Gerard, your chance to ask a question.
Thank you for calling on me, and thank you for this wonderful session. I'm wondering about the proliferation of digital/data programs at our very own institutions that actually are serving to feed the brute, so to speak. And they talk about throwing ethics into it and stuff like that, but I don't see how these business models could actually function without the ethical violations that we see through digital through surveillance capitalism. So I was just wondering what your reactions to that would be.
Could I start maybe? So to me, I think the way we need to deal with this as data science and other types of programs emerge in our universities and our business schools is to really think of digital technologies and data-driven approaches as a kind of new skill, a new kind of condition for science, for business, for the kind of pillars that we normally engage with. So, I mean, our programs at universities take into account that societies emerge and develop in particular ways, that economies operate in particular ways, and so on and so forth. And I think we need to think of digital technologies and data at that level. So not have specialized data science programs with a little bit of ethics sprinkled on top and a little bit of sociology sprinkled on top, but really kind of interdisciplinary programs that try and integrate a deep understanding of artificial intelligence and data and technologies with sociology or business administration or philosophy or what other kind of topics that you are interested in. So I think the way we need to do this is really to work in a very interdisciplinary manner in our companies, in our organizations, and so on and so forth. And if we want to get there, I think our programs need to sort of have these skills integrated early on.
I would just add that, and And I agree with that wholeheartedly. And I would simply add that I think the whole, when we talk about what we can do as scholars and as researchers, language is a really important piece of what we can do, because we're talking about a domain in which language has been crafted and invented and disseminated by the corporate interests of surveillance capital. And, for example, I don't use the word platform. I don't describe things with the word platform. There was a time when the word platform made sense. And when Chibora wrote about platforms, it made sense in the late 90s, before there actually was a clear surveillance capitalism to even describe or cognize. But a platform is a neutral, technical kind of term. And what I try to do is to always use words like a corporation or surveillance capital or a company, to make clear that we're talking about social entities with power and interests and all the rest of the things that we're talking about in the spirit of critical thinking. And ethics, unfortunately, a beautiful word, an extremely important disciplinary area, but the word ethics has been hijacked by the companies. And if you believe the first-person account of a PhD student at the MIT Media Lab, who was a student of Joi Ito, who was the director of the Media Lab, the famous, fabled director of the Media Lab for many years, who was discredited over his engagements with Jeffrey Epstein and sex trafficking, and had to leave MIT. But he was attracting funds from companies like Google and other companies into the MIT Media Lab, but also in some cases they were investing in his own private venture capital, small investing operation, which was another reason for his discrediting. And according to his graduate student, it was Mr. Ito who first put the phrase together, quote, ethical AI. And the idea was that these companies were extremely concerned about a potential regulation of their work in AI. They wanted to get people focused away from the harms of AI. Mr. Ito came up with this kind of solution that we'll start talking about ethical AI. And then you may recall Google quickly established an advisory board on ethical AI, bringing the good and the great together to opine on how they should do AI ethically. And I think it was a week or maybe less than a week that the advisory board had to be disbanded because nobody on the board could agree on what any of this even meant, or if it was relevant, or if it was legitimate, or anything else. And poof, we never heard about it again. But ethical AI had legs, and it spread, and it has become normalized. And good people who are sincere and really have the very best of intellectual intentions have also ingested this kind of language. So in my world, I don't talk about ethics until after we have law, and after we have rights, and after we have the new institutions to enforce, as Mikkel was saying, those laws and those rights. When we have those deep institutional protections that we need for a democratic digital century, then we can talk about ethics. But the idea that these profit maximizing corporations are going to voluntarily leave revenue on the table in the favor of some kind of ethical whatever is, to me, sheer folly and a kind of naivete and lack of a real grasp of the real politique and situational awareness that we need today to be the critical kinds of scholars that we're aspiring to.
Thank you.
Thank you.
A question of time management. I think we have a few more questions, and with everybody's assent, I would like to keep going till 11:35 or so. Give John, Christina, Deborah, and possibly Saku some time to ask questions. John, to you. You are muted, John.
I'll start again. Samas, thank you, and thank you to all of the three presenters for a really useful discussion. When there is a problem, or a societal problem, scholars come and study it and diagnose it, and sometimes create a new vocabulary to explain it, as Shoshana has done brilliantly. That's phase one. Then there has to be phase two, which is in some way proposing a solution to the problem that is realistic and can be implemented. And then phase three follows on from that, where you actually try it, see whether it works, and if it doesn't, if it does, great. If it doesn't, you circle around and start over. Now, I read Surveillance Capitalism with fascination a few years back. But what I didn't see in that was the explanation of how we could fix the problem. And in fact, there is more than one problem. There are several. There is the ChatGPT one, which is quite recent. There is the earlier one of people basically stealing our data and using it for targeted advertising, which I don't like at all. There is the one about highly targeted advertising for political purposes, which subverts our democracy. All of these are discrete problems to which we need some kind of solution. And to my mind, it is not, well, we're missing something, and we can't just wait for some mythical good person or mythical good government or very wise regulator in the sky to come down and dictate what the answers are. We need to find the answers ourselves and start to build up consensus behind them to get them implemented and tested. And the answers are not going to be purely regulation. This is more of an observation than a question, but it may become a question. The answers are not going to be purely regulation, because regulation purely limits what is done now. It is probably going to be a new model for data over networks, which involves not only user control, but also a business model and a funding model and a route to scale, etc. Shoshana, if I could maybe pose the question to you, is it a fair comment that I'm making? Do you agree, and do you see anywhere that a new model is emerging?
Well, I probably receive, I don't know, 50 or 60 emails a week of people who have new models.
Yes.
That are pro-social and advance the kinds of values and principles that have long been associated with democratic societies, and do the kind of thing that I was mentioning quite briefly in my remarks, the idea that datafication is tied to individual decision rights, that data use is tied to public good. What are the real problems that we're facing right now? Because the companies are the ones who have these vast data flows based on the secret massive scale extraction that they're still allowed to do. They're the ones who have the huge concentrations, not only of economic power and wealth, but also of knowledge, data and knowledge. And we could identify the whole rung: data, information, and knowledge. This is an equally important form of concentration. And then the power that makes possible, that moves both into governance functions in society and also over society, various forms of social activities. So, so the issue here is what has to happen to open up the landscape so that the many people who are invested in very different ways of doing commerce and thinking about economic transactions in this digital century and an information civilization, that the space is there for them to do it. So what's happened over the past 2 decades is that essentially what I call the surveillance dividend. Right now, and you look across every sector, and essentially what's happening is, and inflation sort of clouds this a little bit, but what we see is, television sets are cheaper than they should be because the real margins in those sets is going to come from the data they collect from your household environment. The same thing with automobiles. Automobiles are moving toward those margins that come from everything that's in the dashboard, whether it's the Alexa or Google Home or whatever it might be. The data that's being collected, people are now within the transportation industry, talking about cars as mobile surveillance platforms. That's how cars are being referred to. So wherever you look, products and services are being redefined as what we call loss leaders for the data that they can collect. And that's where the margins are coming from. That's the surveillance dividend. And that's what investors have privileged over all other kinds of business opportunities. So this is why I believe that there is a if you think of a brick wall and then there's that keystone, that there is a very simple keystone that all of this is built on. And if you eliminate the legality of secret massive scale extraction, then what you do is you go step by step and you eliminated all the capabilities that undergird the surveillance dividend. And you very quickly open up the economic landscape for myriad other business models. We don't know which ones are going to be most successful. There are lots of different things that people are talking about. And that's the kind of experimentation that we would be doing. The opportunity cost right now for global society is onerous, really is unconscionable, because what's happening now is that on the strength of their data flows, it's the surveillance empires that essentially control the global market landscape for artificial intelligence. And what they're doing with that control is deciding what becomes knowledge in the first instance. And their focus is on things like if user does A versus doing B, will they stay on the page longer? Will they do more things that accrue to our economic, our commercial objectives? And so the knowledge opportunity itself is being squeezed into this narrow band of what advantages the owners of the data and the knowledge creation capabilities. So the opportunity cost here for global society is essentially, killing the capabilities of this grand new civilization that should be blossoming around us. And that's why I think that the business models are not the problem. The problem is getting rid of this nexus between the investment community and these illegitimate margins that come from these fundamentally illegitimate operations of secret extraction. And when we do that, 1,000 flowers will bloom instantly. People are queuing up, waiting for this opportunity. And then we'll get to see what the real non-conscripted interaction is between consumers and these companies, not the interactions that come as a result of being captive audiences in these new worlds of no escape.
So in effect, your solution, your cure, is a rewriting of privacy legislation like GDPR to make mass data extraction more difficult, if not illegal.
Not exactly, because, you know, just a metaphor very quickly. Real-time bidding data, RTB data, you know, this comes from the companies, the data, some of it goes through some profiling, some analysis, but it essentially goes through them into ad tech that then supplies it to the specific advertisers who bid on the opportunity to get their ad on your screen. So research that was done last year with the Irish Civil Liberties Council revealed something very interesting about RTB data, specifically looking at Google. In the United States, where there is very little regulation, one might say almost no, well, certainly no comprehensive privacy legislation, John. Every single American adult has their RTB data broadcast by Google. Specifically, we're talking about Google's RTB data, broadcast by Google from Google all the way to the advertisers, 747 times every day.
Wow.
No regulation. There is no privacy there, John. My language for this is we've blown past the conversation about protecting privacy. There is no privacy. But now let's look at Europe, where there is GDPR and there is probably the world's best, certainly the world's best privacy regulation. Every adult European has their Google RTB data broadcast 376 times daily. Does regulation make a difference, John? Yes. Does it make enough of a difference? Well, that may be a matter of personal taste, but according to my taste, no, it's not making enough of a difference. So when I look at the DSA, the DMA, if we get the AI legislation, these things are game changers. There is no doubt. These things put Europe at the frontier of all the work we're talking about as far as a democratic resurgence, a democratic contradiction against these forces that have taken control. But none of these contains the fundamental solutions that we need to be discussing. What they do, John, is for the first time is they create the conditions where we can have these conversations. We can now talk about the actual abolition. You know, when we talked about child slavery, I mean child labor, we didn't say 5 hours a day for a 5-year-old and 10 hours a day for a 10-year-old. We said eventually in our societies, child labor is catastrophic. It's against everything that we believe and want for our societies. And that is just categorically immoral. And it has to be abolished. We don't bargain with it. And that's where I think we can get to now. That's a conversation that starts to be legitimate that we can have because we have the DSA and the DMA and because we've come so far. And you're right, I agree with you. Public mobilization, collective action from the public, ultimately in combination with lawmakers, is going to be essential. But I think it's about moving on beyond piecemeal regulation to deeper and more trenchant solutions that fundamentally redraw the map of what is allowed to occur, where the power sits, what interests are served.
Okay, we are 15 minutes over time. So it's time to draw this session to a close. I know there were hands up, Deborah, I'm sorry, but we're gonna have to stop. We are way over time. I hope this session was generative for the community. I was very impressed by the conversion vocabulary that is starting to emerge regarding these issues and how the speakers are trying to build this agenda. So I'm so grateful for the opportunity to engage with the three of you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Joop, back to you.
Yeah, yeah. There's nothing for me to add to that, other than thank you, Sama, for wonderful moderation from your side, and also the audience for participating so lively. And I thought it was a wonderful discussion, and very happy. I mean, the papers that the three panelists today wrote are, I got so many more insights listening to the three of you today, and they're really worth reading. So I encourage you also, if you haven't read them yet, to go to the website. So thank you again, and yeah, thank you to also particularly to Samar and Ibrat and Sophia for organizing, and again to our three panelists for sharing their wisdom. So thank you, and good evening, or continue the rest of the day. Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. An amazing discussion. I really appreciate it. Learned a lot and had a great time talking to all of you. Thank you all for coming.